My brother slept with my cheating wife and expected me to forget about it, but he fucked up. Now he and my slut wife are dealing with all this mess, while my mom and dad don't want to see them and told me I'll be the only one getting everything after they die. Sup, Reddit. I'm a 30-year-old guy named Dylan, and I've been keeping this mess to myself for way too long. I figured it's finally time to share what happened, so maybe you guys don't get screwed over like I did. I genuinely thought I had the perfect life and family situation going for me. Everything seemed stable, predictable, and exactly what I'd always wanted. Until one day, it all completely disappeared with a single phone call from my cousin. Here's the whole story of how my world fell apart and somehow ended up better than ever. This story really starts way back when we were kids, because understanding my brother is crucial to everything that happened later. I'm the older brother. I was always the quiet kid who actually gave a damn about school and my future. I kept to myself most of the time, preferring books and studying to causing trouble. My brother Tyler, who's 23 now, was the complete opposite from day one. He was loud, obnoxious, and spoiled as hell from the moment he could walk and talk. Picture this. While I'm sitting there at the kitchen table doing calculus homework and minding my own business, trying to get good grades so I could get into a decent college, this kid is running around the house like he owns the place. He'd slam doors, leave messes everywhere, interrupt whatever I was doing, and generally act like the world revolved around him. And the worst part? Everyone just accepted it as normal behavior. Here's the thing that really gets me, even all these years later. My mom treated Tyler like he was some kind of precious artifact that needed constant attention and protection from the harsh realities of life. I'm talking about full-service treatment here, the kind of treatment that creates entitled adults who never learn how to function independently. She'd make his meals from scratch every single day, carefully preparing whatever he was in the mood for. She'd do his laundry without him even asking, fold it neatly, and put it away in his room. She'd organize all his school stuff and pack his backpack for him like he was incapable of basic organization. And get this, she'd constantly ask me to help him with his homework. Not because I was the older brother and should help out as part of normal family dynamics, but because apparently that was just expected of me. It was treated as my responsibility to make sure Tyler succeeded academically, while he got to sit there and soak up all the attention and praise when he did well. Meanwhile, when I achieved something on my own, good grades, academic awards, whatever, it was just expected and barely acknowledged. The worst part about this whole dynamic was that nobody ever asked Tyler to return the favor. Ever. When I needed help with something difficult, whether it was homework or projects or anything else, he'd just shrug and walk away like I didn't exist. But God forbid I didn't drop everything to help His Royal Highness with his basic math problems or science projects. If I ever tried to say I was busy with my own work, I'd get lectured about family responsibilities and being a good big brother. I learned pretty early on that complaining about this arrangement was completely pointless and would only make things worse for me. My dad was always working late at the construction company he managed, pulling long hours to support our family financially. When he was home, Tyler would instantly put on this perfect little angel act that was honestly impressive in how convincing it was. He'd suddenly become helpful, polite, and charming, a completely different person from the demanding brat he was the rest of the time. My mom had already made up her mind about who her favorite was, and nothing was going to change that dynamic. I was pretty independent anyway, so I figured whatever. I'll just handle my own stuff and focus on my goals. Looking back now, that was a big mistake because Tyler took my independence as permission to treat me like his personal servant for the next decade. He learned that he could make demands, expect me to solve his problems, and generally treat me like hired help without any consequences. The kid never learned basic empathy or how to actually work for anything meaningful in his life. Why would he? Everything was handed to him on a silver platter while I was over here learning life lessons the hard way through trial and error. By the time we hit middle school, Tyler had figured out that he could basically torture me with zero consequences from our parents. And I'm not talking about normal sibling rivalry or typical brother stuff that you see in most families. This was next-level psychological warfare that would make the CIA jealous. Tyler had turned manipulating me into an art form, and he genuinely seemed to enjoy causing me emotional pain. The dude would sneak into my room when I wasn't home and go through my personal stuff, looking for anything he could use against me later. He'd read my journals, looked through my school papers, examined my belongings, basically conducting intelligence-gathering operations against his own brother. I'll never forget the time he found my diary and read it cover to cover, memorizing every embarrassing detail I'd written down. Then he ran straight to our mom with every single embarrassing thing I'd written about crushes, insecurities, fears about fitting in at school, the whole deal. All the private thoughts that a teenage kid writes down when they think they have a safe space to process their emotions. When I confronted him about invading my privacy and violating my trust in such a fundamental way, he just smirked at me with this look of pure satisfaction and said, "Maybe you shouldn't write such pathetic crap if you don't want people to laugh at it." The casual cruelty in his voice was chilling, like he genuinely didn't understand why I was upset about him weaponizing my private thoughts against me. When I brought this incident to our mom, hoping for some justice or at least acknowledgement that what Tyler did was wrong, she just laughed it off, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Oh, that's just how brothers are," she said dismissively. "You boys will work it out." But the situation got worse from there, way worse than I could have imagined. School became its own nightmare because Tyler knew exactly what psychological buttons to push to cause maximum damage. The kid knew I was already getting picked on by some other students for being quiet and studious, and instead of having my back like a normal brother would, he'd actually encourage my tormentors. He'd join in on the bullying, calling me names and providing them with personal ammunition to make my life even more miserable. Tyler would tell my bullies things like embarrassing stories from home, details about my fears and insecurities that he'd learned from going through my personal stuff, or just general information that gave them more ways to hurt me. Basically, he was feeding them ammunition to make my school experience as awful as possible, all while pretending to be the innocent little brother at home. The names they'd call me still stick with me today, even as an adult. Ugly, loser, 4 eyes because of my glasses, all that creative middle school cruelty that kids excel at. But hearing my own brother laugh along and add his own insults to the mix cut deeper than anything those random kids could say. He'd tell them things like, "Yeah, he still sleeps with a nightlight," or "He cries when he watches Disney movies." Personal, vulnerable information that he only knew because we lived in the same house and shared the same family. The breaking point came during one of our fights at home. I can't even remember what started this particular argument. Probably something stupid like him eating my leftover pizza or using my stuff without asking. But at the end of this fight, Tyler looked me dead in the eyes and told me to kill myself. Just like that. No hesitation, no taking it back afterward, no moment of, maybe I went too far. When I looked shocked and hurt by what he'd just said, he doubled down on it instead of backing off. "Seriously," he said, "nobody would even miss you. You're just taking up space in this family." The words hit me like a physical blow, and the worst part was how matter-of-fact he sounded when he said it, like he was just stating an obvious truth. I was already dealing with some serious mental health issues at that age. Feeling like an outsider in my own family, getting picked on at school constantly by kids who seemed to sense my vulnerability, and struggling with the typical teenage stuff that everyone goes through. And then my own brother, the person who should have been my ally and support system, drops that bomb on me about killing myself and nobody missing me. That's the kind of thing that sticks with you forever, you know? Those words echo in your head during your darkest moments for years afterward. My dad was basically MIA during most of this toxic family dynamic because of his demanding work schedule. He was working long hours trying to provide for us financially, which I understood and respected, but it meant he wasn't around to witness the day-to-day psychological warfare happening at home. And my mom had already decided in her mind that I was the problem child who started all the fights and caused all the drama. According to her twisted logic, if I just stopped provoking Tyler and learned to get along better, everything would magically be fine. She couldn't see, or chose not to see, that I was usually just trying to defend myself or stand up for basic respect. In her mind, Tyler was the innocent victim who only reacted when I pushed him too far, which was completely backwards from reality. The attempted hair-burning incident during high school was when things finally reached a level that even my mom couldn't ignore or dismiss as normal sibling behavior. Picture this scene. I'm sitting at my desk in my bedroom doing chemistry homework, completely focused on balancing equations and trying to understand molecular structures. I'm in my own space, minding my own business, not bothering anyone. Tyler walks up behind me with a lighter in his hand, and without any warning or provocation, he starts trying to set my hair on fire. This wasn't some playful prank or moment of poor judgment. He was actually trying to light me up like a human torch. I could smell the burning as the flame got close to my head, and I freaked out completely, jumping up from my chair and running to get our mom before he could actually succeed in seriously injuring me. When I frantically explained what had just happened, showing her the lighter and describing how Tyler had tried to burn my hair, her first reaction was the same dismissive response I'd gotten my entire life. Oh, he was just playing around. Playing around? He literally tried to set my head on fire. What kind of playing around involves potentially causing serious burns or permanent injury to your own brother? This incident was so extreme that even my mom couldn't completely brush it off, but she still tried to minimize it and make excuses for Tyler's behavior. It took my dad finally witnessing one of these incidents firsthand for anything to change in our household dynamic. When Dad saw Tyler's true nature with his own eyes, the cruelty, the complete lack of empathy, the way he seemed to enjoy causing me pain, he completely lost his mind. "Enough is enough," he told Tyler in a voice I'd never heard him use before. "You need to start respecting your older brother and acting like part of this family instead of a destructive force." These were simple words, but hearing them felt like the validation I'd been waiting for my entire life. Finally, someone with authority in our house had witnessed what was really going on and was willing to stand up for me. After Dad's intervention, everything changed dramatically. Not just the family dynamics and Tyler's behavior toward me, but my own sense of self and confidence. Dad pulled me aside for a private conversation that was basically like something out of Good Will Hunting, except instead of "it's not your fault" being about childhood trauma, it was about years of psychological abuse from my own brother that I'd been enduring in silence. "Tyler has been becoming a bully, and it's not your fault," my dad said, looking me directly in the eyes. "You've been trying to handle this on your own for too long, and I should have seen what was happening sooner." I almost broke down right there in that moment because someone finally saw what was happening to me and believed my version of events instead of dismissing my concerns. But Dad didn't just stop at words and empty promises. The next day, he marched into my school and had a serious conversation with the principal about the bullying situation I'd been enduring. Suddenly, those kids who'd been making my life hell were getting real consequences for their actions instead of getting away with tormenting me day after day. Then Dad enrolled me in MMA classes at the local gym, which was probably the best decision anyone had ever made for my development as a person. "You need to learn to stand up for yourself," he said. "Not just physically, but mentally too. You need to build confidence and learn that you have the right to defend yourself when people try to hurt you." I'll be honest, a skinny, nerdy kid like me walking into an MMA gym for the first time was pretty pathetic. Imagine Napoleon Dynamite trying to learn how to fight professionally trained athletes. But I've always been focused and disciplined when I want to learn something new, so I carved out time from my studying schedule to hit the gym every single day without fail. The transformation was absolutely insane. 6 months later, I'd put on significant muscle mass, learned actual fighting techniques that worked in real situations, and most importantly, gained confidence I'd never had before in my entire life. I started walking differently, talking differently, and carrying myself like someone who wouldn't be pushed around anymore. When Tyler tried his usual stealing routine, taking money I'd saved up from doing weekend chores around the neighborhood, I was finally ready for him. This wasn't just a few dollars either. This was money I'd worked hard for, doing yard work and helping neighbors with various projects for weeks. I caught him red-handed trying to ride off with his friends, planning to use my hard-earned money for whatever stupid teenage activity he had planned that day. When I confronted him about the theft, he gave me that same smug look I'd seen countless times before. The expression of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "All you can do is run to Daddy like the little bitch you are," he said, with that familiar, arrogant tone, expecting me to back down like I always had in the past. That's when I channeled my inner Rocky Balboa and gave him a perfect right hook to the face, using everything I'd learned in those months of MMA training. The kid went down like a sack of potatoes, completely unprepared for the fact that his former victim had learned how to fight back effectively. I calmly took my money back from his pocket while he was sprawled on the ground, trying to process what had just happened to him. The look of shock on his face was absolutely priceless. It was like he couldn't believe that his personal punching bag had finally grown some teeth and was willing to use them. For years, he'd operated under the assumption that I would always be the passive victim who took whatever abuse he wanted to dish out. Tyler started crying like a little kid, which was honestly embarrassing to watch. Here was this teenager who'd spent years tormenting me, reduced to tears after getting a taste of his own medicine. But even while crying and holding his face, he was still calling me names and making threats. "You psycho," he sobbed. "I'm telling Mom you attacked me for no reason." When our mom came running out after hearing the commotion, she immediately started laying into me about hitting her precious baby boy. She didn't even bother to ask what had led to the fight, or whether Tyler had done something to provoke it. In her mind, I was automatically the aggressor who'd crossed a line by using physical violence against her golden child. But when Dad got home and heard the full story about Tyler stealing my money, about his arrogant response when confronted, about the months of abuse that had led to this moment, he backed me up completely. "He's lucky you just punched him," Dad told Tyler, while looking him straight in the eyes. "Anyone else would have called the cops for theft, and you'd be dealing with criminal charges right now." From that point forward, Tyler kept his distance from me physically. He finally realized that the power dynamic had shifted permanently, and he couldn't rely on physical intimidation anymore. I was no longer the scrawny kid who could be pushed around without consequences. The verbal abuse continued, but now it felt more like the desperate whining of someone who'd lost their power and was grasping for any way to maintain control. College became my escape route from the toxic family dynamics that had defined my childhood and teenage years. I got accepted to my dream school in Chicago on an academic scholarship, which felt like winning the lottery. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely proud of an achievement that was entirely my own, something that couldn't be diminished or overshadowed by Tyler's drama. Dad threw me a going-away party, inviting extended family and neighbors to celebrate my accomplishment. Mom seemed proud too, finally acknowledging that I'd achieved something significant through my own hard work and determination. And Tyler? Well, Tyler just sulked in the corner during the entire party, making snide comments under his breath about how college wouldn't fix my personality problems and how I'd probably fail and come crawling back home. That's where I met Victoria, who's also 30 now, at a frat party during my sophomore year. We just clicked immediately in a way that felt natural and effortless. She was smart, funny, came from what seemed like a good family with solid values, and actually seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person, rather than just looking for a college hookup. We started dating seriously. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had something genuinely good and positive that was completely separate from all the toxic family stuff I'd grown up with. Victoria represented a fresh start, a chance to build something healthy and normal with someone who didn't have years of baggage and dysfunction clouding every interaction. Victoria was my opportunity to prove to myself that I could create the kind of loving, supportive relationship that I'd never experienced in my family. She seemed to appreciate my loyalty, my work ethic, and my determination to build a stable future. Coming from a religious family, the whole no kids before marriage thing was pretty strict and non-negotiable for both of us. So when she got pregnant during our senior year, we made the decision to get married right after graduation. Looking back now, maybe we rushed into marriage a bit too quickly, but at the time, it felt like the right thing to do. We were young, in love, and ready to start our own family without all the dysfunction and emotional abuse I'd grown up with. Our wedding was small but absolutely perfect for what we wanted. Both families showed up to support us. Everyone seemed genuinely happy for our new beginning together, and I truly believed I'd found my person, the one I'd spend the rest of my life with. She was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. Loyal, supportive, intelligent, and someone who could help me build the kind of healthy family I'd never experienced growing up. I had this deeply romantic mentality that I wanted to be a one-woman man, like in those classic old movies where the guy finds his girl, and that's it forever. No looking back, no wondering about what else might be out there, no temptation to stray. I genuinely believed that Victoria and I were going to be that couple that makes it to their 50th anniversary, still holding hands and talking about their grandchildren. I really liked the idea of monogamy and complete devotion to one person. Having one person to come home to every day, to build a life with through all the ups and downs, to grow old together and share all of life's experiences. Even when other women would flirt with me or show clear interest over the years, and it did happen occasionally, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content and satisfied with what I had at home. We had our daily routines down to a comfortable science. I'd get up early for work at the marketing firm where I'd landed a good position after college. Victoria would handle getting our son Mason ready for daycare and dropping him off, and we'd reconvene in the evenings for dinner and quality family time. Weekends were dedicated to family activities, going to parks, visiting museums, having picnics, or just spending relaxed time together at home. It was comfortable, predictable, and everything I thought I wanted from married life. The stability felt like such a contrast to the chaos and dysfunction I'd grown up with. But looking back now, there were warning signs that I completely missed or just brushed off as normal married couple stuff that everyone goes through after being together for several years. Victoria started having these moments where she'd just zone out completely during our conversations. I'd be telling her about my day at work, sharing funny stories from the office, or asking about how her day had gone, and she'd get this distant, vacant look like her mind was somewhere else entirely. When I'd notice and ask if she was okay or if something was bothering her, she'd snap back to attention and say she was just tired from work or stressed about some project. She also became weirdly protective and secretive about her phone, which was a major change from how things had been earlier in our relationship. Suddenly, she was taking it everywhere with her. To the bathroom, to bed, even to the kitchen when she was just getting a glass of water. The phone was always face down on surfaces, and she'd get noticeably anxious if I was anywhere near it when it buzzed with notifications. When I jokingly asked if she was hiding something or if there was some big surprise she was planning, she'd get defensive and accuse me of being paranoid or controlling. "Why would you even ask that?" she'd say with genuine irritation. "Can't I have some privacy without you getting suspicious about everything?" The emotional coldness was subtle at first, so gradual that I barely noticed it happening. Like when I'd try to be affectionate, putting my arm around her while watching TV, giving her a kiss when I got home from work, or just trying to have intimate conversations about our relationship. She'd seem almost annoyed by the attention. She wasn't pushing me away exactly, but she wasn't reciprocating either. It felt like she was just going through the motions because it was expected, treating affection like a chore she had to endure. Our intimate life started declining significantly too. She'd always have perfectly reasonable excuses. Too tired from a long day at work, stressed about some big client presentation, not feeling well, headaches, you name it. I figured it was just normal married couple stuff that everyone talks about. Everyone says the passion naturally fades after you've been together for a while and have kids, so I brushed off my concerns and tried to be understanding and patient. She started working late much more often, claiming she had big projects with demanding deadlines and difficult clients who required extra attention. I never questioned it because Victoria had always been ambitious and dedicated to her career, and I genuinely respected that about her. Plus, the extra income was beneficial for our family's financial situation, so I just picked up more of the slack at home with Mason's care and household responsibilities. The weirdest thing, though, was how she started acting around my family during our regular family gatherings. She'd seem almost nervous or jumpy, like she was on edge about something. I'd catch her having these intense, whispered conversations with Tyler that would stop abruptly the moment I walked over to join them or see what they were discussing. When I'd ask what they were talking about, she'd give me some vague, dismissive answer like, just catching up on his life, or he was asking about my work stuff. I remember thinking it was actually kind of nice that she was making an effort to connect with Tyler, since he'd always been somewhat cold and distant toward me throughout our relationship. Maybe she was trying to help repair the damaged relationship between my brother and me by being the bridge that brought us closer together. Tyler had actually been unusually friendly and charming toward her from the very beginning of our relationship, which I'd stupidly interpreted as him finally growing up and learning how to be nice to people. But now I realize he was just being his typical manipulative self, turning on the charm when it served his purposes and gave him something he wanted. I trusted Victoria completely, so none of these changes individually seemed like major red flags at the time. They were just minor shifts in behavior that I chalked up to work stress, the natural process of getting older, and the normal evolution that happens in any long-term relationship. I was so focused on being the good husband and father, on providing for my family and maintaining our stable home life, that I never stopped to consider what might really be going on beneath the surface. Sometimes I wonder if part of me didn't want to see the signs because acknowledging them would have meant dealing with a reality I wasn't prepared to face. It's much easier to stay in denial and make excuses when the alternative is having your entire world fall apart and admitting that everything you believed about your life was a lie. The truth was too devastating to consider, so my mind protected itself by rationalizing away every concerning behavior. Everything changed completely 4 months ago when my cousin Sophie called me out of the blue and asked to meet me for lunch. We'd always been close growing up, sharing secrets and supporting each other through various family dramas. But as adults with our own families and demanding careers, we only saw each other at big family gatherings like birthdays and holidays. So when she said she needed to talk to me about something important and couldn't discuss it over the phone, I figured it was probably about planning someone's birthday party or organizing a family reunion. Maybe there was some family drama I hadn't heard about, or she needed advice about her own relationship. I certainly wasn't prepared for what she was actually going to tell me. We met at this little diner downtown that we'd gone to as kids with our grandparents. Right away, I could tell something was seriously wrong with Sophie. She looked uncomfortable and anxious, kept fidgeting with her coffee cup, and couldn't make direct eye contact with me. This wasn't the confident, outspoken cousin I'd grown up with who usually had no problem speaking her mind about anything. "I need to tell you something," she started, then stopped completely and took a deep breath like she was preparing to jump off a cliff. "And I really don't know how to say this without it completely destroying you." My stomach immediately dropped because in my experience, conversations that start like that never end with good news. "It's about Victoria and Tyler," she said, and the way she said their names together, like they were a unit, like they belonged in the same sentence, made my blood run cold. Something about her tone and the look on her face told me that whatever came next was going to change my life forever. Sophie told me that at the last family barbecue, the one where I'd spent most of the afternoon playing with Mason in the backyard and helping my dad with grilling burgers and hot dogs, she'd gone inside to use the bathroom. As she was walking through the house, she overheard voices coming from the kitchen that made her stop in her tracks. She recognized Victoria and Tyler's voices immediately, and they sounded like they were having an intense, heated argument about something serious. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop," Sophie said, clearly feeling guilty about what she'd overheard. "But they were being pretty loud and emotional, and I heard Victoria say something that made me stop and listen more carefully." The words that came out of Sophie's mouth next felt like a physical punch to the gut, like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. I literally felt the blood drain from my face as she repeated what she'd heard. "What if he's yours? What if they find out?" Sophie said, mimicking Victoria's panicked, almost hysterical tone. Victoria had sounded desperate and scared, like she was dealing with a crisis that could destroy everything. Tyler was apparently trying to calm her down, telling her to keep her voice down and that nobody would ever know the truth if they were careful. The conversation had stopped abruptly when someone else came into the kitchen, and Sophie had pretended she hadn't heard anything, quickly ducking into the bathroom and trying to process what she'd just learned. "I've been wrestling with whether to tell you for weeks," Sophie said, looking absolutely miserable. "But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet, and you never found out what was really going on." I sat there in that diner booth, feeling like the entire world had tilted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same again. The words kept echoing in my head. What if he's yours? There was only one possible interpretation of that statement, and it was the one scenario I'd never even considered in my worst nightmares about what could go wrong in my marriage. My wife, my brother, my son, the three most important people in my life, and apparently two of them had been living a lie that involved the third. I thanked Sophie for having the courage to tell me, and I probably seemed calm and composed on the outside, but inside I was completely falling apart. My hands were shaking as I got up from the table. I drove home in a complete daze, trying to process what I'd just learned while also trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with this information. How do you even begin to handle the revelation that your wife might have been cheating with your own brother and that the child you've been raising and loving might not actually be yours? That night, I started paying very close attention to things I'd been unconsciously ignoring for months, if not years. The way Victoria and Tyler looked at each other during family gatherings. Those lingering glances that I dismissed as just being friendly. The private conversations that would stop abruptly the moment I approached them, which I'd rationalized as them just catching up on each other's lives. The way Victoria would light up when Tyler's name came up in conversation, showing more enthusiasm than she'd shown for anything involving me in recent memory. I noticed how Tyler had been unusually friendly toward Victoria from the very beginning of our relationship, which was completely out of character for someone who'd spent most of his life being cold and hostile toward me. Now I could see it for what it really was, him working his manipulative charm to get something he wanted, regardless of who he had to hurt in the process. I spent the next few days doing some serious detective work, diving into all the classic paranoid spouse investigations that I never thought I'd be reduced to. I checked phone records, went through credit card statements line by line, analyzed social media activity patterns, and basically became a private investigator in my own marriage. The evidence was absolutely overwhelming once I knew what to look for and stopped making excuses for suspicious behavior. There were hotel charges on our joint credit card on days when Victoria claimed to be working late at the office. Text messages between Victoria and Tyler that had been deleted from their phones, but still showed up in our phone company's detailed records. Business trips that Victoria had taken that coincidentally aligned perfectly with Tyler, being mysteriously unavailable when I tried to reach him for family events or just to hang out. The worst part was realizing how long this affair had been going on based on the patterns I could track through financial records and communication data. They'd been carrying on this relationship behind my back for years, not months. Years of my life where I was playing the devoted husband and father, completely oblivious to what was happening right under my nose in my own family. Within 1 week of Sophie's devastating revelation, I went into full strategic mode. This wasn't going to be some emotional confrontation where I stormed into the house screaming and made impulsive decisions that would hurt me later. I was going to handle this situation calmly, methodically, and intelligently to make sure I didn't get screwed over any more than I already had been. My first stop was my best friend Brandon's law office. He'd been telling me for years to call him if I ever needed legal help with anything, and I never thought I'd actually have to take him up on that offer. Brandon could see immediately that something serious was wrong and cleared his schedule to meet with me that same afternoon. Brandon recommended a family law attorney who specialized in high-conflict divorces and had a solid reputation for protecting men's interests in custody battles and asset division. This wasn't some general practice lawyer. This was someone who dealt with exactly my type of situation on a regular basis and knew how to navigate the system effectively. The lawyer walked me through everything I needed to know about protecting myself legally and financially. We filed for a court-ordered paternity test, which would be legally binding and couldn't be challenged or disputed later by either Victoria or Tyler. I started systematically documenting all the evidence of the affair I'd discovered, making copies of financial records, and building a comprehensive case that would hold up in court. Next was protecting my financial assets from any potential retaliation or attempts to drain our accounts. I opened a separate bank account at a different institution and started gradually moving money out of our joint accounts. I canceled all shared credit cards to prevent any revenge spending sprees. I got my name removed from anything that could potentially be used against me financially later in the divorce proceedings. I changed passwords on all my personal accounts, email, social media, work accounts, everything, and started keeping important documents at Brandon's office where Victoria couldn't access them or destroy them in a moment of anger. Every step was calculated to protect my interests while maintaining the element of surprise. The divorce papers were filed by the end of that week. Since we live in an at-fault state, Victoria's adultery would be a major factor in determining asset division and custody arrangements. My lawyer was confident we had an extremely strong case that would result in me keeping the house, getting a favorable asset split, and having primary custody of Mason if the paternity test confirmed he was actually my biological son. Only after I had all my legal and financial protections in place did I decide it was time to confront Victoria directly. I wasn't going to give her advance warning that would allow her to hide assets, destroy evidence, or coordinate her story with Tyler. This was going to be a controlled confrontation on my terms. I waited until Friday evening when Mason was at a sleepover with one of his friends from school. Victoria was in the living room scrolling through her phone, probably texting Tyler for all I knew. "We need to talk," I said, walking into the room with a folder full of evidence tucked under my arm. Something in my tone and body language made her look up immediately from her phone. I could see the instant recognition in her eyes. She knew this wasn't going to be a normal conversation about household responsibilities or weekend plans. There was a moment of panic that flashed across her face before she tried to compose herself. I laid out everything I'd discovered on the coffee table in front of her like I was presenting evidence in a courtroom. Phone records showing deleted text conversations between her and Tyler. Credit card statements with hotel charges on days she'd claimed to be working late at the office. Business trip itineraries that mysteriously coincided with Tyler's sudden unavailability whenever I tried to contact him. Victoria's face went through what I can only describe as the classic stages of being caught red-handed. Confusion, denial, panic, and finally resignation when she realized the evidence was completely overwhelming and undeniable. There was no way to explain away the paper trail I'd assembled, no innocent explanation that could account for all the lies and deception. "I can explain," she started, but her voice was already shaking, and she couldn't maintain eye contact with me. The confident, composed woman I'd been married to for years had disappeared, replaced by someone who looked cornered and desperate. "Go ahead," I said, sitting back in my chair and crossing my arms. "Explain how you've been screwing my brother behind my back for years while I've been working my ass off to provide for what I thought was our family." The bluntness of my words seemed to break something inside her. She started crying, but they weren't tears of genuine remorse. They were the tears of someone who'd been caught and was trying to find a way out of the consequences. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she sobbed, like the affair had been some kind of accident rather than a deliberate choice she'd made repeatedly over years. Tyler and we just connected on a level that you and I never did, she continued, apparently deciding that honesty was her only option at this point. He actually listens to me, pays attention to me, makes me feel like I matter as a person instead of just another responsibility on your to-do list. I waited for her to continue, knowing there was more justification and blame shifting coming. I'd learned enough about manipulative behavior from dealing with Tyler my entire life to recognize the pattern she was falling into. You're always working late, always focused on your career or your hobbies or whatever project you're obsessing over, she said, her voice getting stronger as she built up momentum. When was the last time you asked me how my day really went and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you planned a surprise for me or took me somewhere special just because you wanted to make me happy? The victim act was absolutely unbelievable. Here was someone who'd been living a double life for years, and she was trying to make it sound like I was the one who'd failed our marriage. So because I work hard to provide for our family and build a stable future, you decided the appropriate response was to cheat with my brother? I asked. It's not that simple, she snapped, suddenly switching from tearful victim to aggressive defender. You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage. Tyler makes me feel alive, makes me feel beautiful and wanted and appreciated. With you, I feel like just another item on your to-do list that you check off when you get home from work. I looked at her for a moment, trying to process the sheer audacity of what she was saying. What did I do wrong, Victoria? I asked. Seriously, help me understand what terrible thing I did that justified you lying to me for years about possibly raising another man's child. That's when she really went off the rails, switching from defensive victim to full-blown aggressor in a matter of seconds. She stood up and started pointing at me accusingly, years of apparently suppressed resentment pouring out all at once. Don't you dare judge me, she screamed, her voice echoing through our living room. You think you're this perfect husband, but you're not. You're cold, you're distant, you're emotionally unavailable. You go through the motions of being married, but you don't actually connect with me on any meaningful level. She was building momentum now, getting more worked up with each accusation. Tyler remembers little things about me that you forgot years ago. He makes me laugh. He treats me like a woman instead of a roommate he happens to share bills with. He pays attention when I talk. He notices when I get my hair done or wear something new. Then why marry me? I asked, genuinely curious about her logic at this point. Why waste years of my life and thousands of dollars I worked hard to earn just so you could cheat on me? Why make me trust you and think we're building something meaningful together? And for what? For a deadbeat who can't even pay his own bills. And now you're sitting here blaming me because you fucked up? Yes, partly yes, she shouted without hesitation. If you had been the husband I needed, I never would have looked elsewhere for emotional connection. If you had paid attention to the signs that I was unhappy, maybe we could have worked on our problems instead of me finding comfort with someone who actually gives a damn about my emotional needs. She kept going, getting more hysterical and irrational by the minute. I stayed with you because I thought maybe you'd change, maybe you'd finally start acting like you actually wanted to be married to me, instead of just going through the motions because it was expected. She'd somehow managed to convince herself that years of adultery and deception were my fault for not being attentive enough to her emotional needs. The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion were truly impressive in their complete disconnect from reality. I let her finish her rant completely, giving her all the rope she needed to hang herself with her own words. Then I calmly reached into my folder and pulled out the divorce papers, placing them on the coffee table in front of her like I was serving dinner. Well, you don't have to worry about any of that anymore, I said in the most matter-of-fact tone I could manage. Victoria's face went completely white as she read the header on the legal documents in front of her. What? What is this? She whispered, even though it was obvious what she was looking at. Divorce papers, I said simply. You've been officially served. The reality of the situation finally hit her like a freight train. This wasn't going to be some dramatic argument followed by tearful reconciliation and promises to work on our marriage. This was the definitive end of our relationship, and I'd been planning every detail while she thought she was still in control of the narrative. You can't be serious, she whispered, her voice barely audible as the full implication sank in. You're just going to throw away our entire marriage over a mistake? Over something that doesn't even have to affect our future together? Funny how you're calling years of systematic deception and adultery a mistake, I said, standing up and looking down at her. You don't even know if our son is actually mine biologically. That's not a mistake, Victoria. That's a complete betrayal of everything our marriage was supposed to represent. She tried one more manipulation tactic, going for the emotional jugular. What about Mason? She said, tears streaming down her face. What about your son who loves you and depends on you? You're just going to abandon him because of problems between us adults? Mason is not my problem anymore, I said coldly. The paternity test will determine who his real father is, and that person can take full responsibility for him. If Tyler is his biological father, then Tyler can figure out how to be a dad. That's when Victoria really lost it completely. She started screaming about how I was heartless, how I was abandoning my responsibilities as a father and husband, how I was going to regret this decision for the rest of my life. She accused me of being cruel and vindictive, of punishing an innocent child for adult mistakes. But I was already walking toward the door, grabbing my car keys as I headed out. I could hear her having a complete emotional meltdown behind me, crying, yelling, probably throwing things around the living room. But for the first time in months, I felt completely calm and in control of my life and my future. It was time to expose Tyler to the people who mattered most in our family. I drove straight to my parents' house, knowing they needed to hear the truth from me before Tyler had a chance to spin his own version of events. Mom and Dad were having their usual evening coffee when I walked in, and they could immediately tell something serious was wrong. I sat down at their kitchen table and told them everything. The affair that had been going on for years, all the lies and deception, the possibility that their grandson wasn't actually their biological grandson. The shock and disbelief on their faces was immediate and obvious. This wasn't the kind of news any parent expects to hear about their children. Mom's first reaction was pure denial. Exactly what I'd expected, based on her lifelong pattern of protecting Tyler. That can't be true, she said, shaking her head vigorously. Tyler would never do something like that to his own brother. There has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Even after everything, even with concrete evidence laid out in front of her, she was still trying to protect her precious baby boy from the consequences of his actions. But I'd come prepared for exactly this reaction. Don't say anything, I told them firmly. Just listen to what happens next. I pulled out my phone and called Tyler right there in front of them, putting the call on speaker so they could hear every word of the conversation that was about to unfold. When Tyler answered, I went straight for the throat without any preliminary small talk. I know about you and Victoria, I said in a calm, steady voice. She confessed everything to me tonight. At first, he tried to deny everything with his usual arrogant, dismissive tone. I don't know what you're talking about. And frankly, I don't appreciate being accused of something I didn't do, he said, sounding genuinely offended by the suggestion that he could be capable of such betrayal. But when I started laying out specific details, exact dates when they'd met at hotels, times when they'd been together while I was at work, locations where they'd carried on their affair, his story started falling apart rapidly. He couldn't explain away the evidence I'd gathered. That's when Tyler's true personality came out in full force, and my parents got to hear exactly who their golden child really was underneath the charming facade he'd maintained for years. Look, it's not my fault if women prefer me over you, he said, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. I'm better looking, more fun to be around, and I actually know how to satisfy a woman in ways you obviously can't. Maybe if you weren't such a boring, uptight nerd, your wife wouldn't have needed to find excitement elsewhere. The room went dead silent. Mom's face had gone completely white, and Dad looked like he was ready to drive over to Tyler's place and strangle him with his bare hands. But Tyler wasn't finished yet. He was apparently enjoying himself now and decided to keep digging his own grave. She came on to me, by the way, Tyler continued, clearly relishing the opportunity to hurt me as much as possible. Kept telling me how unhappy she was with you, how she wished she'd met me first instead of settling for my boring older brother. I was just being a good brother-in-law, you know, giving her the attention and affection her husband was too pathetic to provide. I'm going to expose you to everyone, I told him, letting him hang himself with his own words. Nobody will believe you, he laughed confidently. I'm the golden child, remember? Mom and Dad have always loved me more than you, and that's not going to change now. That's when I dropped the hammer that would change everything. Thanks for confirming everything, bro. Mom and Dad heard every word of this conversation because you're on speakerphone. The silence on the other end of the line was absolutely deafening. Then Tyler started stumbling over his words, desperately trying to backtrack and undo the damage, but it was far too late. His mask had completely slipped, and my parents had heard exactly who their golden child really was beneath the surface. Dad took the phone from me and I watched as years of disappointment and suppressed anger finally came pouring out. His voice was trembling with a combination of rage and heartbreak as he spoke to his younger son. "What you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother," Dad said, pausing to let the weight of his words sink in. "It's a betrayal of this entire family and everything we tried to teach you about loyalty and decency. I raised both of you to value family above everything else, to protect each other, and to be men of integrity," he continued, his voice getting stronger and more resolute. "What you've shown today goes against everything I tried to instill in you. The complete disregard for your brother's feelings, the total absence of remorse for destroying his marriage, the arrogance and cruelty in your voice. It's absolutely unacceptable, and shows me that I failed somewhere as your father." Then Dad dropped the financial hammer that would change Tyler's life forever. "Starting today, I'm cutting you off completely from your college fund. You can figure out your own university fees from now on. I won't be funding your lifestyle anymore, paying for your car insurance, or giving you spending money. You think being a selfish, destructive person makes you superior to your brother? Let's see how you handle real life when you don't have my money to depend on." Tyler tried to protest, his voice suddenly getting more aggressive and entitled as the reality of losing his financial safety net hit him. "This is complete bullshit!" he yelled through the phone. "You can't punish me for something that's between me and him. This is none of your business, and you can't cut me off. I'm your son too, and I deserve the same treatment he gets." But Dad hung up on him mid-sentence, cutting off his desperate protests and excuses. The silence in the kitchen was heavy as we all processed what had just happened. 3 hours later, I was back at home reviewing divorce documents and trying to plan my next moves when my security system alerted me to someone at the front door. The cameras showed Tyler standing on my porch, and he looked absolutely unhinged. He was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair and clearly agitated about something. I almost didn't answer the door, but something told me this confrontation was inevitable, and it would be better to get it over with on my terms rather than let him escalate the situation further. I opened the door, and Tyler immediately started laying into me with the kind of vicious verbal assault I hadn't experienced since we were teenagers. "You piece of shit!" he screamed, getting right in my face with his finger pointed at my chest. "You ruined everything! Mom and Dad cut me off because of your little tantrum. You couldn't just handle this like a man and deal with your marital problems privately. You had to go crying to Mommy and Daddy like the pathetic loser you've always been." I tried to stay calm and not let him provoke me into doing something stupid, but Tyler kept escalating the situation with increasingly personal attacks designed to hurt me as much as possible. "Victoria never loved you, you know that, right?" he said with a cruel smile. "She told me you were boring in bed, that you had no idea how to make her happy as a woman. She only stayed with you because you were the safe choice, the reliable provider who could give her financial security. She did things with me she never did with you, if you know what I mean." The words were specifically chosen to cut as deep as possible, and honestly, they worked. But what pushed me completely over the edge was what came next, the comment that crossed every line of human decency. "And that kid you've been raising and loving like your own son?" Tyler said with obvious satisfaction. "Imagine finding out that my son has been calling you daddy while his real father has been screwing his mom for years. How does that feel, you pathetic cuck?" Something inside me finally snapped completely. Years of pent-up rage from childhood abuse, the humiliation of discovering the affair, the betrayal by both my wife and brother. It all came flooding out at once in a moment of pure fury. I punched him square in the face harder than I'd ever hit anyone in my entire life. Tyler stumbled backward, blood immediately streaming from his nose, but instead of backing down or retreating, he charged at me like a wild animal who'd lost all rational thought. "I'm going to kill you!" he screamed, swinging wildly with both fists and trying to tackle me. That's when all those MMA lessons from high school kicked in instinctively. Tyler might have been bigger and louder, but he'd never learned how to actually fight. His movements were clumsy and predictable, driven by emotion rather than technique. I dodged his sloppy swings easily and landed 2 more solid hits to his face before he went down hard on my front porch. Blood was pouring from his nose and mouth, and he was groaning like he might be seriously hurt. When he looked up at me from the ground, his eyes were filled with pure hatred and disbelief. "You're going to pay for this," he wheezed, struggling to get back on his feet. "I'm calling the cops right now. You assaulted me for no reason, and Mom and Dad will have to choose between their violent son who attacks family members and their other son who just made a mistake with his sister-in-law." I helped him to his feet and told him to get off my property immediately before I called the police myself. He stumbled to his car, still bleeding and making threats about pressing charges and ruining my life in retaliation for what I'd done to him. 2 days later, the police showed up at my door with questions about an assault complaint that had been filed against me. Tyler had apparently followed through on his threats and filed an official report claiming that I'd attacked him completely unprovoked at my own home. The officers needed to hear my side of the story before they could determine how to proceed with the case. That's when I pulled out my ace in the hole, the security camera footage from my front porch that had captured the entire incident from start to finish. I'd completely forgotten about the cameras in the heat of the moment, but they had recorded everything that happened that evening. The cameras had captured Tyler showing up uninvited at my house, screaming threats and obscenities at me from the moment I opened the door. The footage clearly showed him making the first aggressive move by charging at me when I tried to defend myself verbally. Most importantly, it documented me acting in clear self-defense against someone who had come to my home specifically to intimidate and physically attack me. The officers watched the footage carefully and immediately changed their tune about the situation. Instead of treating me like a suspect, they were now viewing Tyler as someone who had filed a false police report. It was obviously a clear-cut case of self-defense against an aggressor who had trespassed on my property with violent intentions. The failed police report turned out to be the final nail in Tyler's coffin with our family. Not only had he lost our parents' support and financial backing, but he'd also shown everyone exactly who he really was when the chips were down. He was willing to lie to law enforcement and try to get his own brother arrested just to avoid facing consequences for his own actions. Mom called me that evening, crying and apologizing for years of enabling Tyler's destructive behavior. "I never saw it before," she said through her tears. "But after today, after everything he said and did, I finally realized that I created a monster by always making excuses for him and protecting him from the real world." She went on to explain how she'd been reflecting on our childhood and could finally see the patterns she'd been blind to for so long. "I failed you as a mother by not protecting you from him, and I failed Tyler by not teaching him how to be a decent human being. I'm so sorry for all the years I let this go on. After the divorce was finalized 6 months later, it felt absolutely surreal at first. I'd gone straight from my parents' house to marriage, so I'd never really experienced the true bachelor lifestyle as an adult. I had no idea what to expect from living alone and being completely responsible for only myself. Turns out, I absolutely loved every aspect of it. No more wondering why my partner was acting weird or distant for no apparent reason. No more trying to decode hidden meanings behind every conversation or analyzing every interaction for signs of trouble. No more family gatherings where I had to watch my wife and brother pretend they weren't carrying on an affair right in front of everyone. Just pure, peaceful solitude where I could focus on rebuilding my life exactly how I wanted it. The house felt bigger and more comfortable without all the tension and secrets filling up the space with negative energy. I redecorated completely, got rid of everything that reminded me of Victoria and Tyler, and basically created a living space that was 100% mine for the first time in my adult life. Work became my primary focus, and without all the emotional drama and stress consuming my mental energy, my performance improved dramatically. I was sharper, more focused, and actually enjoyed going to the office instead of dreading whatever family crisis might be waiting for me when I got home each evening. The divorce process took 6 months total, which in legal terms is pretty fast for a contested case. Having solid documented evidence of the affair, proof of Tyler's aggressive and threatening behavior, and living in an at-fault state made everything much smoother than it could have been. Victoria tried to fight for the house, for spousal support, and for primary custody of Mason, but her legal position was extremely weak, and her attorney knew it. The paternity test results came back exactly as I'd suspected they would. Tyler was indeed Mason's biological father, which meant I'd been unknowingly raising another man's child for years. That news hit me harder than I'd expected. Even though I'd been mentally preparing for this outcome for months, I'd genuinely loved Mason as my own son, and finding out he wasn't mine felt like losing a child while simultaneously gaining a constant reminder of betrayal. It was a complex mix of grief, anger, and relief all rolled into one devastating revelation. Victoria tried to use the paternity results to argue that I should still maintain a relationship with Mason, saying that an innocent child shouldn't be punished for adult mistakes and poor decisions. She wanted me to continue being a father figure, while Tyler got to be the fun uncle who didn't have real responsibilities. But I couldn't do it emotionally. Every time I looked at Mason, I saw Tyler's features and remembered years of lies and deception. Maybe that makes me selfish or cruel, but I needed to cut all ties to the situation in order to move forward with my life in a healthy way. In the final settlement, I got to keep the house, most of our shared assets, and most importantly, my dignity and self-respect. Victoria ended up moving in with Tyler, which I'm sure created all kinds of awkward dynamics for everyone involved. She went from being a married woman with a stable home and financial security to being essentially the other woman living with a guy who'd never had to take care of anyone but himself. 3 weeks ago, Dad called me with news that would change everything in the best possible way imaginable. I've been thinking a lot about my will and how I want to handle our family's financial future, he said, in a serious tone that immediately got my attention. After what Tyler did to you in this family, I can't justify leaving him anything significant in my estate. My dad isn't the type of person to make idle threats or empty gestures when it comes to serious family matters. When he makes up his mind about something important, especially something as significant as inheritance and family legacy, that decision is absolutely final and irreversible. Tyler had tried multiple times over the past few months to reconcile with our parents, even showing up at their doorstep, begging for forgiveness and promising to change his ways. But Dad wouldn't even let Tyler in the house anymore. He'd simply tell him through the door that his actions had consequences and that he needed to learn to live with the choices he'd made. There was no discussion, no negotiation, and no possibility of earning back what he'd lost through his betrayal. "I'm changing everything over to you," Dad continued, and I could hear the finality in his voice. "The house, all the investment accounts, retirement funds, life insurance policies, everything. It's about $1.2 million total when you add it all up." I was completely stunned into silence. $1.2 million was more money than I'd ever imagined having access to in my entire life. It represented decades of my dad's hard work, careful saving, and smart investment decisions. The fact that he was trusting me with this legacy felt overwhelming and humbling at the same time. "Tyler will get exactly $100 in the will," Dad explained, "so he can't legally contest the inheritance later by claiming he was accidentally forgotten or overlooked. It's a token amount that proves the exclusion was intentional and well considered. The only condition attached to this incredible inheritance was completely reasonable, and something I would have insisted on anyway. If Dad passed away before Mom, she could continue living in their house for as long as she wanted, even though I would technically own the property. Obviously, I agreed to this immediately. I'd want to take care of my mother no matter what the legal arrangements were. The best part about this whole situation was knowing that Tyler had somehow found out about the will change and was absolutely losing his mind over the financial implications. Word travels fast in families, and someone had apparently mentioned the new arrangements within Tyler's earshot. Yesterday, Tyler called me for the first time since the police incident, and it turned out to be the most pathetic conversation I've ever had in my life. His entire tone was different. Gone was the arrogant, entitled attitude that had defined his personality for as long as I could remember. Instead, he sounded desperate and defeated. "Look, I know we've had our differences over the past few months," he started, trying to sound reasonable and mature. "But I'm really struggling financially here, and I was hoping maybe we could work something out between us as brothers." I started laughing out loud at his desperation and complete lack of self-awareness. Here was someone who'd spent years psychologically tormenting me, had destroyed my marriage, and had tried to get me arrested on false charges, now coming to me for help with his money problems. "College tuition is expensive. Victoria is demanding child support payments for Mason, and I can't seem to find decent work anywhere in town," he continued, his voice getting more whiny and desperate with each word. "Maybe you could talk to Mom and Dad about giving me another chance? Family should stick together, right?" "Family should stick together," I repeated back to him, genuinely amazed by his audacity. That's really rich coming from the guy who stuck it to my wife for years instead of respecting family boundaries. "Come on, man," he said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. Victoria was just as much to blame for what happened as I was. "You can't hold this grudge against me forever. I made a mistake, but I'm still your brother, and I need help." "You're absolutely right," I told him with genuine agreement. Victoria was equally to blame for the affair and the years of deception. That's exactly why I divorced her and made her your problem to deal with instead of mine. You wanted her so badly that you were willing to destroy your own brother's marriage? Congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. I continued, enjoying the opportunity to lay out the reality of his situation. "You got Victoria. along with all the financial responsibilities and emotional drama that come with her. You got Mason, who you'll need to support financially for the next 15 years. You got all the consequences of your choices, just like adults are supposed to. When Tyler started raising his voice and getting aggressive, his default response whenever things don't go his way, I shut him down immediately before he could work himself into a rage. "Let me make something crystal clear to you," I told him in the calmest voice I could manage. "You're no longer the golden child in this family. You're not the favored son who gets everything handed to him without consequences. You're the guy who betrayed his own brother, attacked him at his own home, and then tried to file false police reports when things didn't go your way." I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final blow. "You made your choices, and now you get to live with them like a grown man. We're done here, and don't call me again asking for help or money." For the first time in our entire lives, I heard my brother actually cry real tears of genuine desperation and fear about his future. Not the manipulative tears he'd used as a child to get out of trouble, but the real, raw emotion of someone facing adult consequences without a safety net to catch him. And honestly, hearing him break down like that felt incredibly satisfying after decades of psychological abuse and manipulation. The golden child who'd spent his entire life getting everything handed to him on a silver platter was now facing the harsh reality of adult responsibilities without mommy and daddy's financial safety net to protect him from his own poor decisions. Tyler had dropped out of college completely when he couldn't afford the tuition payments after dad cut off his funding. He was now working part-time construction jobs, the same kind of physical labor he'd always looked down on as beneath him. Meanwhile, he was living with Victoria and trying to figure out how to pay child support for a kid he'd never planned to raise as a single father. The irony was delicious. Tyler had always acted like he was superior to me because he was more charming and outgoing. But now he was discovering that charm doesn't pay the bills or provide for a family. All those years of coasting on his personality and good looks had left him completely unprepared for real adult responsibilities. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents had never been better in my entire life. Dad and I go golfing together every weekend now, and he treats me more like a close friend and equal than just his son. We have deep conversations about business strategies, investment opportunities, and life goals. All the meaningful discussions I'd wanted to have with him for years, but never could because Tyler's drama was always dominating the family's attention and energy. Mom took significantly longer to come around to accepting the new family dynamic, but she's finally acknowledged that Tyler made his own choices and has to live with the consequences like any adult. She doesn't bring him up in conversation anymore, and when extended family members ask about Tyler's situation, she just says he's figuring things out and quickly changes the subject to something more pleasant. I got promoted at work 3 months ago, which came with a substantial salary increase and better benefits. My boss told me directly that I'd been performing at a much higher level since my divorce was finalized, and he wanted to reward that dramatic improvement in my work quality and focus. Without all the emotional stress and family drama consuming my mental energy, I was able to concentrate fully on my career and professional development. I'm not dating anyone yet, but for the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely happy being alone with myself. I don't feel lonely or incomplete without a romantic partner. I'm enjoying the freedom to make decisions based solely on what's best for me, without having to consider someone else's needs or navigate complex relationship dynamics. The best part of this entire situation is watching karma work its magic on both Victoria and Tyler in real time. They got exactly what they claimed they wanted, each other, but without any of the stability, financial security, or emotional support they'd been taking for granted during my marriage to Victoria. Living together has been a harsh wake-up call for both of them. Victoria went from a comfortable middle-class lifestyle with a reliable husband to living paycheck to paycheck with a guy who can barely keep steady employment. Tyler went from being the carefree bachelor with no real responsibilities to suddenly having to provide for a woman and child on a construction worker's unpredictable income. From what I hear through the family grapevine and mutual acquaintances, they fight constantly about money, household responsibilities, and their uncertain future together. Turns out that when you build a relationship on lies, deception, and betrayal, it doesn't create a very solid foundation for dealing with real-life problems and stress. The passionate affair that seemed so exciting when it was secret and forbidden has turned into a grinding daily reality of bills, child support obligations, and the mundane challenges of actually living together as a family unit. The thrill of sneaking around and breaking taboos has been replaced by arguments about who's going to do the dishes and how they're going to afford rent next month. The irony is that they're both genuinely miserable now. living the exciting life they thought they wanted, while I'm over here thriving in every possible way. Better job performance, improved financial situation, better mental health, closer relationships with my parents, and the promise of a substantial inheritance that will set me up for life. Sometimes I drive by their apartment complex just to remind myself how far I've come and how much better my life has become without toxic, dishonest people dragging me down. They made their bed with lies and betrayal, and now they get to sleep in it together every night while dealing with all the consequences of their choices. Meanwhile, I sleep peacefully in my own house, the house I earned through hard work and integrity, without any drama, lies, or people plotting against me behind my back. The final cherry on top of this whole situation came last week when I heard through my cousin Sophie that Tyler had been desperately begging our extended family members for money. He was apparently going around to aunts, uncles, and cousins, claiming that I had somehow stolen his rightful inheritance and that the family should pressure our parents to change the will back to include him equally. But everyone knows the real story by now. Word has spread throughout our entire extended family about what Tyler did to me, to our family, and to the sacred trust that should exist between brothers. Nobody wants anything to do with him or his financial problems because they all understand that he created this situation entirely through his own selfish actions. Looking back on everything that happened over these past months, I realized that discovering the affair was actually the best thing that could have happened to me in the long run. It freed me from a lying, cheating wife who was never truly committed to our marriage or our family. It exposed my brother for the selfish, manipulative piece of garbage he really is underneath his charming facade. Most importantly, it showed me who my real family is and which relationships actually matter in my life. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to realize what you actually deserve. I thought I wanted the perfect nuclear family with a loving wife and a son to carry on my legacy. What I actually deserved was honesty, loyalty, and people who genuinely care about my well-being rather than just what I can provide for them. I'm 30 years old now, financially secure beyond my wildest dreams, emotionally healthier than I've ever been, and for the first time in my entire life, completely free from people who were actively holding me back and undermining my happiness. I don't have to walk on eggshells around anyone. I don't have to wonder if the people closest to me are lying to my face, and I don't have to waste my energy on relationships that were fundamentally one-sided. The best revenge really is living well, and I'm living better than I ever imagined was possible. I wake up every morning in my own house, go to a job where I'm respected and valued, spend time with family members who actually appreciate me, and go to bed each night knowing that nobody is plotting against me or taking advantage of my trust. Tyler and Victoria, meanwhile, are learning the hard way that actions have consequences and that building a relationship on betrayal and selfishness doesn't lead to lasting happiness. They wanted excitement and passion, but what they got was financial stress, constant arguments, and the knowledge that they can't trust each other since they're both capable of devastating betrayal when it suits their purposes. Every day that goes by, I become more grateful that I discovered the truth when I did, rather than wasting more years of my life on people who never deserved my loyalty in the first place. Some people spend their entire lives in toxic relationships, never realizing they deserve better. I got out while I was still young enough to build the life I actually want. If there's one lesson I've learned from all of this, it's that blood relation doesn't automatically make someone family, and marriage vows don't guarantee loyalty. Real family consists of people who support you, respect you, and want to see you succeed, regardless of whether you share DNA or legal documents. My parents have proven they're my real family by supporting me when it mattered most. My cousin Sophie showed she's real family by having the courage to tell me the truth even when it was difficult. Tyler and Victoria showed they were never really my family at all. They were just people taking advantage of my trust and generosity for their own selfish purposes. I'm not bitter about what happened anymore. I'm actually thankful. Without their betrayal, I might have spent the next 20 years in a loveless marriage, never knowing that my wife didn't respect me, and my brother was actively working against me. Now I have the chance to build something real and authentic with people who actually deserve my time and energy. The future looks brighter than it ever has before. I have financial security, career success, genuine relationships with people who care about me, and complete freedom to make choices based on what's best for my own happiness and well-being. Tyler lost everything that actually mattered: family support, financial security, and his reputation, in exchange for a relationship built on lies that was never going to last. Victoria lost a stable marriage and comfortable life in exchange for uncertainty and constant stress with someone who proved he can't be trusted. Meanwhile, I gained clarity, self-respect, genuine family relationships, and a level of peace and contentment I never knew was possible. Some might say I lost a wife and brother, but the truth is I never really had them in the first place. What I lost were illusions, and what I gained was reality. And reality, it turns out, is so much better than the lies I was living with before.